Welcome to the Kolbecast, episode 16. Glad you could join us. In today's episode, I interview one of my favorite longtime students, Sophia Harne. Unlike most of my students, I have never taught Sophia Latin. I first met her when she was in high school and had already learned Latin from her father, Dr. George Harne. She signed up for my online German course at Kolbe back in 2014. I was living in Germany then and had no idea that only 5 years later I would have the privilege of being Sophia's teacher once again, this time teaching Greek at Magdalen College in New Hampshire, literally in Sophia's backyard, and that these classes would be in person. Connecting with students face-to-face has been one of my biggest joys recently since my return to the U.S., and I hope you will detect the bond that began in a Kolbe online classroom and is now enjoyed and strengthened 3 times a week in our meeting space for Greek studies at Magdalen. Today, I just wanted to kind of talk with you a little bit about your language learning experience and then different forms of learning online, in person, things like that. And so how about if we just kind of start at the beginning? When did you first start learning foreign languages and what were they?
So I started learning Latin very young. I don't remember this, but I have been told when I was about 6 or 7, I went up to my dad and he was working on his dissertation. And I asked him, Dad, what are you doing? And he said, he was translating something and he said, I'm doing Latin. And I was like, oh, I want to do Latin. And so he started, at that point I could read, so he started kind of teaching me the very basic vocabulary, very basic grammar, and the very basic Latin prayers. And then as I got older, I was homeschooled most of my life, and I continued to kind of pursue Latin and to grow, kind of reinforcing what I had learned as I got older, because when you're young, it's helpful to start with the very simple things and kind of get those basics down. And then in high school, I discovered Greek, and I took 2 summer courses in ancient Greek that were very much meant to kind of give a very broad overview of the language, and I quickly fell in love with it. I love Latin and Greek, both for different reasons, but and then this past year, I started kind of officially taking Greek for the first time with you, Dr. Almanzar, at Magdalen. So, and then, of course, German as well in high school. I forgot to mention. I did take, I think, 2 years of German in high school, which was also wonderful. That's my only experience with modern languages.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. I remember even then never knowing that I would be, your teacher in person one day or that I'd even meet you. But it was interesting. Even then, I was surprised how much you could relate things to Latin. It seemed like you would ask, is this like the case system in Latin or whatever? And so would you say that an ideal way to learn languages is to start with Latin?
Oh, definitely. I think that one of the biggest benefits of learning kind of a non-modern, an ancient language, is that the way in which you learn it is going to be completely different. And so, because you're primarily learning it to read it, not to speak it. And so in learning in that way, you often, at least this has been my experience, tend to learn a lot more about the structure of the language and kind of its inner workings and its grammar. And not only does that then, for me, it helped me immensely understand English grammar, even though English grammar is different, obviously, than, Latin or, but it helps you understand the way that kind of most languages that you're going to encounter work.
Yeah. That's
in encountering them, in that way, then when you go to learn a modern language, you have that grammatical and that structural background that's so beneficial.
Yeah.
So that was my experience, at least.
Well, you come from a family of musicians, I know, and I've thought like Latin is almost something like learning the piano, and then you can relate all the other instruments to it. I don't know if that's a good analogy, but it's kind of that way in my experience as well.
No, definitely, and because it has this real beauty to it. It's a language. It's not math, right? Like the words mean something, and not that math isn't beautiful, but in its own right, but, it has this beauty to it, but there's also this incredible order. And I think it relates to music particularly in that way. Music is, there's this intricacy and this orderliness to it that kind of can evoke wonder. And I think that is also true of languages.
Man, yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I think you're right. And you mentioned you fell in love with Greek when you first encountered it, and what was it? Is there anything specific about the language that you remember that you thought, "Wow, this is really a great language"?
I think this is a very superficial reason, but I really like the way that Greek sounds when it's spoken. And so I would hear Greek being read, and I was just struck by phonetically how beautiful it is. And then another thing is, in many ways, at least this is I have limited experience, but my experience is that in many ways Greek can be more specific than Latin, which simultaneously makes it more difficult, but also in many ways more beautiful, right? And even, this is kind of generally philosophically understood, Greek has 4 different words or more, maybe more, to speak of love, right? Whereas we only have one. And so I find that Greek in general is, there's just this intricacy and this beauty to it in its complexity, because it is a very complex language. So I think that those were kind of the 2 things that struck me, just the beauty of it, just kind of for when you first encounter it, the way that it's written and the way that it sounds, but also then in the structure of it and what it means. Yeah,
that's so true, because it is beautiful, and being able to write in another alphabet that you can like just read it and read it as though you're reading Latin characters. That's something that kind of, I think, sets you apart. It's like, sure, a lot of people learn Latin, but it's the same alphabet, those sorts of things. And one of those first hurdles is overcoming just the alphabet and pronunciation and those types of things. Did you, when you were learning these languages, I'm just wondering, are you somebody who makes flashcards and studies flashcards, or how did you get your vocabulary in these languages?
The thing that has been most beneficial for me, so Latin, I kind of had a head start, because the way that my dad taught me is we went through like these mountains of flashcards year after year after year when I was very young. And so it's hard for me to speak from there, because that's kind of a unique thing that is more difficult to replicate when you get older. Like, I just have a mo in my head and I can't get it out. That is difficult at this point for me to forget. But when it comes to learning kind of vocabulary now, online flashcards have definitely been the most beneficial for me. I use Quizlet, and there's a particular function where you put in online flashcards, and oftentimes they have sets that have already been made. But there's a particular function on there that prompts you to type out the word. So you'll see the Greek word or whatever, and then you have to then type the English word, or vice versa. And for me, that is the most helpful way, because I'm actually being forced not just to kind of vaguely recall the answer, but actually to type it out. That for me has been the most helpful, just kind of, in my attempting to learn vocabulary. So
that's great advice. And I know you were very organized this past year in Greek, putting together those charts and things like that. Are you able to relate a lot of that stuff back to your early experiences with Latin, or does it feel like you're just forging this new way?
Well, I think that one thing that is beneficial is just so much between Greek and Latin is structurally similar. And in many ways, Greek, some of the structure in Greek can be easier than in Latin. Not the verbs, but everything else maybe. Greek doesn't have an ablative, for instance. So very structurally, actually, it would be interesting. Sometimes I would copy on my computer like the Latin charts, and then go just replace all the Latin content with Greek content, because the structure of the language is so similar. So, like, in terms of cases, they just function similarly. And so I think, I don't know if that answers your question, but
it does.
That's been beneficial.
And that's something I think that becomes very apparent if you're at a certain level of Latin. So people that aren't far enough along, like after a year of Latin, there would be some kind of similarity, but not to the level. If you get a little bit farther in Latin, you can really see it's like, and you see some of the development in later Latin and the influence. I've always been fascinated by the influence of the 2 languages on each other. And you see that, studying the Bible mostly, like the transmission of the New Testament text down through the Middle Ages, and you can start to see some of those things. I'm wondering when you were taking Greek and it was like those overview classes, what was your experience then doing it in a slower manner like we did this past year, but you were also very busy with other subjects, other things that you were studying. What's the difference between taking, I guess, in your experience, between taking one of these intensive courses and then doing like a full year at a better pace?
It's actually, I think that they're very complementary in many ways. And I think I see this too, like with my friends who are even learning Latin for the first time. Oftentimes, as they're kind of learning, they'll reach a point in the semester where, I'll be maybe talking to them about something, and they'll reach this moment where they're like, oh my goodness, and it just clicks. And they can kind of go back, and then they actually want to go back and proceed more closely and more carefully through a lot of what they've already learned, because you really kind of have to get to this point where, you've kind of gotten through a lot of the grammar, and then you start to see the whole, right? It's kind of like, that first big overview, you're accessing a map, right? And you're looking at this big map, and you can't describe, necessarily, oh, this individual place, I've been here, I can talk about it super specifically, but you get this sense of, oh, this is the landscape. This is the overview. And then when you then proceed to go through, and this is my favorite part, but when, like we did Greek this past year, when you're able to go through it much more slowly and have time to digest it and to practice it and to really memorize a lot of this stuff, that's when it's like, you're hiking those mountains, right? You're encountering the landscape in more than just kind of looking at it.
Oh, yeah.
But I definitely think that having that map is for sure beneficial. And you don't have to have the map. I mean, you can just dive in, right? Like, just go hiking. But I think they're complementary in that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's an awesome description, actually. Yeah, I think that's great. What is it that you're hoping to read in Greek? Like, once you get to a certain level, I know you've encountered some advanced texts in some of the other courses, but what is it is there some specific author, some specific text that you want to read?
I mean, honestly, this is probably very obvious, but I'm very much looking forward to being able to easily read the Gospels, and to easily read the New Testament. It's just so beautiful, and it's such an incredible thing to be able to kind of even more concrete, even though, like, I'm not probably going to ever reach, biblical scholar, advanced level of Greek. It's never going to be my first language. It's never going to be completely intuitive. Just to be able to encounter the Bible in that way, I think, is such an incredible thing. Yeah. And so beyond that, I would also say we spent one of my summer intensive courses reading quite a bit of Lucian, which was quite the adventure. He's kind of comparable to kind of Gulliver's Travels. And it's very entertaining. It's very funny. But it's a pretty good level of Greek, and I very much enjoyed that. And so I would love to revisit that at some point, kind of when I've solidified more of my Greek knowledge. Yeah, that's, and what you say, what's a huge benefit in reading the Gospels and things like that is when you do go to other texts that are harder and then you come back, because I would say the majority of Americans that learn that are learning Greek at all, not modern Greek, but Koine or classical Greek or whatever, they're always learning it for the idea to read the Bible. And I think when you go past that level and then come back to the Bible, it's even better. I mean, of course. So like I say that for Latin. Like I love the Latin Bible now in a way that I don't think I would have if I would have just pursued the Latin Bible. But then I read Cicero and Seneca and all these people, and then I come back to the Bible and I just love it. So there is something to be said for reading Lucian and reading people like this and then going to the Bible. But we had a pretty cool, at least I thought so, and it seemed like you guys did as well. I was amazed how it was pretty early on, maybe even in the first semester last year, when we started looking at the opening of Romans. And you guys were making your way through the text and seeing things that were like jumping out that you'd never seen before, seeing significance in things that in English you kind of just read over, and I think that that's going to be a huge reward for you. And your major, I mean, how does Greek play into your major? Well, tell us about your studies and if Greek plays into what you're wanting to do long term, I guess, in your collegiate career. Oh, definitely. So I am currently an incoming sophomore, and here at Magdalen, we have 4 majors. It's all liberal arts core, but we have philosophy, theology, politics, and literature. And you actually choose your major junior year. And so I have kind of, for a while, been very interested in philosophy. Learned a lot of philosophy in high school, and that is something that I very much want to pursue. I'm also very interested in theology, and I probably won't major in theology here, but in grad school plans, definitely philosophy and theology are both on my radar. And Greek is so helpful. Greek and Latin as well, but Greek kind of in its own unique way, in that so many philosophical terms, so many things are referenced from both of those languages that are just incredibly beneficial when it comes to talking about, reading philosophical texts and talking about philosophical ideas, right? If you're going to have a conversation with someone about the nature of love, right, you're going to start distinguishing between agape and philia and eros, and when you know Greek, you actually know not just kind of what those words abstractly mean because you've been told, oh, Greek has 4 different words for love, here are kind of what they mean. No, you've encountered these words in texts. And I think what you said about the Gospels, too, in particular, you get to see where those different words are used in the Gospels to mean different things. I mean, that completely changes. When you're reading an English text, you're going to encounter love almost every time you encounter one of those 4 words.
Yeah.
But when you're reading it in Greek, suddenly you can, the meaning just becomes alive in a whole new way. And so, and then linguistically, of course, there's so many benefits, because so many English words and other words are derived from Latin and Greek, that when you have a foundation in the vocabularies of those languages, like anthropology, right? The study of the human person, like I don't even have to think twice because I know anthropos in Greek is man and logos is word, right? And so it also makes it easier to remember some of the jargon and the terminology because you understand the root of all of that.
Man, that is all so true. And like you said, you see love and you don't realize there's all these other words behind it. Time is a huge one in with chronos and kairos. And so the 2 Greek words and kairos is so simple, yet there's no way to really, I mean, I guess occasion is a way to express it, but it's not exactly the same. And so somebody just reading the New Testament in translation, in an English translation, sees time all those times. But if you, I've done a search, I can't remember what it was, but it was overwhelmingly kairos was used rather than chronos. And we have the conception of chronos in our, in English, but not really kairos. That's just lost. And I have kind of, it may seem like a silly question, but I ask this once in a while to my high school students at Kolbe as on a quiz or something. Actually, I think I did it at Magdalen too, to the Latin students, but I don't think I asked the Greek students. What's your favorite case of the cases in Greek or Latin, and why?
Oh, goodness. In Latin, I really say the ablative because the ablative is incredibly frustrating. In Latin, it probably is the ablative. I think kind of because it's the junk drawer case and everything else is stuffed in there. Yeah. But it also I think also because in Latin, the ablative makes for some fun ambiguities.
Yeah.
And you really have to rely on context for a lot of different things because you can sometimes it's a little bit unclear exactly how it's being used. And then in Greek, I like the absence of the ablative, which isn't a case. But the functions of the ablative in Latin are kind of divided over the genitive, dative, and accusative. But no, in Greek, I probably just like the nominative.
Yeah,
it's very intuitive. Very simple,
good. So one other question that's similar. In Latin, I guess it's more interesting in Latin, but I guess it can kind of apply in Greek as well. What declension is your favorite?
Oh, goodness. I think when it comes to Latin, probably the 4th declension is just a fun declension.
Yeah.
And there are very few words associated with it. it's one of those things where, you're at the end of, your basic Latin grammar learning, and it's pretty intuitive. It's not very complicated, and it's funny sounding. So
Yeah.
I think probably fourth declension for Latin. And then for Greek, I really just like the sound, I think, of the first declension.
Yeah.
It's just beautiful. I love the endings of the first declension in Greek.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have to go with that.
Yeah, good answer. So you, with both of the Latin ones, you had to think a little bit more. The Greek, it was like you just knew, but maybe it's just fresh in your mind now. What's funny, like if people are listening to this and they may have no idea what we're talking about at all, and there'll be others that maybe have been learning Greek and Latin, and I've had students get in arguments about what's the better declension and why. So if you're in the language, the classical language world at all, then you'll know what we were just talking about. Otherwise, you probably have no interest in the two questions that we just had. So Sophia, I'm wondering if you're thinking about learning any other languages. Do you have any goals for that in the future, and what would they be?
Definitely. I think that I'm very interested. I don't currently know any I know English, but I've not learned any modern languages. And I'm very interested kind of in re-entering the world of German, and also partially for, that's very helpful in studying philosophy, but also just because I think it would be beautiful and wonderful to be able to speak another language, and that's a language I'm particularly interested in. But I do really want to take the time to kind of put the cherry on top of my Latin studies. I feel like I really want to go back and revisit and just absolutely master all of the grammar. Because there are things that you'll kind of get rusty on, and so I think first, before I even do that, I really want to go and master Greek and Latin. But definitely, I very much am interested in learning German, and Spanish as well. I think would be helpful. In many respects. So
yeah. Well, you'll definitely be able to do it. I mean, it's there's so much that relates to German, as you know, from these classical languages and things. And one day you'll probably get asked to teach or something like that, and that's when you really, I think, get the grammar really well, because you go through it again with students, and now you're the one who has to know all the answers and stuff. So it kind of forces you to do it.
No, definitely.
Yeah. So is there any other encouragements or anything you'd like to say to any I guess if there's probably people listening to this who are interested in possibly pursuing Greek. We're offering Greek 1 at Kolbe Academy this year, and we've already had a good crop. And what would be some encouragement for why take Greek, even if they haven't had Latin? Why take Greek this year?
Well, I mean, I think everything that we've talked about, kind of with the benefits of just learning an ancient language, definitely still stand. It really is. Not only do you learn a language, but you learn basically the basis for how many languages work. And that is just wonderful unto itself. And just the experience of it, I think the experience of learning a language is a very unique thing, because you really have to persevere in the beginning. And that's kind of the encouragement that I would give, is I would say at the beginning, especially if you have learned a language, if you know Latin and you're learning Greek, the beginning difficulty is always the alphabet, right? You're looking at these characters, you have no idea what sounds they mean, much less, what words they're signifying. But especially then also if you have never learned kind of a language before and you're jumping into the world of either Latin or Greek for the first time, there is this kind of almost culture shock, where not only are you learning this language, but you're like, what is a case? What is this? What is the not? Verb tenses? Like, what is all of this terminology? But I think that one of the most rewarding things is when you do persevere, you kind of have to keep walking forward and trusting that it is going to make sense. It is going to click. And then suddenly, there comes the day where you look behind you and you're like, whoa, I see how this all fits now. And so I think that, just encouragement, if at the beginning it seems confusing, put the time in, persevere in it. And it is so rewarding and it's so beautiful, and it's really, it's just an incredible thing. And there's something that's so satisfying about being able to pick up a text, a primary source of Latin, or even, like you were saying with the Gospels, in many ways the Gospels are actually kind of simple.
Yeah.
In certain passages, and there's something so satisfying about having studied Greek for a semester and a half and being able to pick up a passage in the Gospels and piece together parts of it.
Yeah.
And you just can't recreate that.
Yeah.
That experience. So yeah, just encouragement to persevere, keep at it. It really does come together if you're willing to put the time in. And yeah, it does make sense eventually.
Yeah.
It can be hard, because you're learning a lot. For us English speakers, we're taught grammar very differently.
Yeah.
And so when you're learning the grammar of one of these languages, it can be difficult, but it really does. It does come together. And
it does help you with English, like you said at the beginning.
Oh, for sure.
I think I became a much better writer as I got better at the languages. Just it teaches you how to think, and even Greek. Even like just our textbook that we are using this year, reading about this family and stuff, the way that the textbook is laid out, it's the same textbook that we'll be using at Kolbe. And there was something in there where I would get inspired sometimes reading these little stories, because it's like you're entering into their world. All of a sudden I'm like, oh, I need to get some sheep and some goats and like start a farm like these people. But there is something to be said for that. And I just really appreciate you coming on and giving encouragement to future students and people who may be listening to this. And I don't know, you have at least a few more weeks, couple months still off for the summer. What are your plans?
Yeah, so my family is actually going to be moving to Texas, which is a really big thing. So I'm currently in the midst of helping them pack and prepare for all that. Just a little while, I'm going to be road tripping with some of my friends from school, which is going to be very, very fun. We're going to go down to Ohio. So that's going to be wonderful. But other than that, not really much. Just going to be reading, getting ready for school. Yeah, packing is going to take up a good amount of that time. But yeah. But thank you so much for having me and for talking about all of this. I love languages. So.
Yeah, me too. Well, let's do it again. Maybe after maybe next summer we'll recap how Greek 2 went and those sorts of things. It'd be awesome. So, but I'll be seeing you up on campus here in a few months anyway.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, thank you, Sophia, and tell everybody I said hi.
All right, will do. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
Mary, our Mother, pray for us. St. Maximilian Kolbe, pray for us. Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam.